Okay class, so in this particular lesson I will be discussing specifically about nested classes. So what is mean by nested classes? Nested classes are nothing but a class inside another class. Just like we can have a nested loops, a loop within a loop, we can also create a class within another class. Now there should be a purpose, there should be a reason for creating nested classes. So what it could be, what specific reason it could be to create nested class? So the purpose of creating nested class is to clearly group the nested class with its surrounding class, signaling that these two classes are to be used together. Like for example, let's consider an example of gearbox which is present within a car. Okay, now gearbox itself is a specific unit of a car, but it has some more components by which it is composed of. Like for example, the gear itself which is present within a gearbox. Okay, so you can say that the gearbox, if you're going to model that particular example within your program, how you can model is by creating a gearbox class as an outer class, and then inside the gearbox class there should be a class for a gear itself, right? Because gear is a part of a gearbox, is a component of a gearbox. So it means that whenever you are considering about creating a nested class, you must have to follow the model itself. Okay, the model which you are basically creating a nested class for. So the nested class over here, we have that, or perhaps that the nested class is only to be used from inside its enclosing or owning class. So over here, enclosing class means the class which is the outer part, okay, or you can say an outer class. So the outer class is known to be enclosing class, or you can say it also that it is a owning class. It owns the class which is present inside it. Okay, it owns the class which is an inner class, or which is a nested class. So Java developers often refer to nested class as inner classes. So whenever someone state about nested class, it means that the Java developer is gonna refer about inner classes. They're gonna refer directly about inner classes. They're gonna understand that you are talking about inner class, or you can basically say that the both of these words, nested and inner, can be used interchangeably for referencing about nested classes. But inner classes, which is known more specifically by the name of non-static nested classes, okay, are only one out of several different types of nested classes in Java. So when we state about inner class, it means that we are talking about only one type of nested class, and that particular type is non-static nested class. There are total 4 types of nested classes which we can utilize in Java programming language. Okay, so we're gonna discuss these types in this particular lesson. Now in Java, nested classes are considered as members of their enclosing class. Okay, so whenever you are creating nested class within another class, it means that you are enclosing that particular class inside another class. So the class on which you are enclosing nested class, that particular class will be considered as owning class. Okay, it owns the class which you are basically you are creating a class within that particular outer class. The class in which you are creating an inner class, that particular class is known to be outer class. Okay, so you can say that the inner class can be considered as a member of the outer class, because that particular class is contained within that outer class. Okay, the outer class owns an inner class, so you can say that the outer class member is also inner class. So over here we have a very important point. It states that a nested class can be declared as public, or it can also be declared as package, which means that it should not have any kind of access modifier, protected and private. So if it is declared as public, it means that we can access this particular class outside of that inner class. Okay, if it is declared as protected, it means that only those class which are inheriting from this class, this nested class, will gonna access that particular class. Or if it is declared as private, it means that it cannot be accessed directly by any other class. So we're gonna discuss these when we gonna take an example. So therefore nested classes in Java can also be inherited by subclasses, as explained in my tutorial about Java inheritance. तो जैसे मैंने आपको अपने लेक्चर में बताया था कि जब आप किसी भी क्लास को किसी क्लास से एक्सटेंड करते हो तो उसमें आपके पास जो है जितनी भी प्रॉपर्टीज़ होती हैं तो वो इनहेरिट हो जाती हैं. तो उसी तरीके से हम नेस्टेड क्लासेस को भी इनहेरिट कर सकते हैं इफ़ वी लाइक. ओके, इफ़ यू वांट टू इनहेरिट the properties which are contained within a nested class, we can do so. So let's discuss about types of nested classes. How many types of nested classes are there? So over here we have a point, it states that you can create several different types of nested classes. Okay, there can be several different types of nested classes, and those different types are listed here. So the first type is static nested class. By the word static you can identify that we gonna have a class which will contain static keyword, because it will be a static class. But which kind of class? It will be a nested class. So it means that it will be an inner class of some outer class. Okay, so this is one of the type of nested class. Then we have the second one is, because we have a static, so you can say that we're gonna have a non-static. Okay, so it will be a class which will not be a static. Okay, or you can say it will be a non-static nested class. Or in simple word, to define this, we say that it is a inner class. We usually say this class as inner class. Okay, so whenever we are referencing about a specific term, when we say inner class, it means that we are referencing about non-static nested class. Then the third type is known as local class. So it is by the name of local, you can identify that it will be a part of a method, because you know that when you define local variables, those variables defined within a method. In the same way, when you're going to define local class, it will be a part of method. Okay, and that particular method will be a part of another class. So it means that this kind of class, this kind of local class, will only be accessible within a method which basically contain this particular class. Okay, the method which contain this particular class will only basically can access this particular local class. Okay, so the last type is known as anonymous class. Okay, this type of class, anonymous, don't have any names. Okay, we don't define this class with a specific name. So we just define this class to add a little bit more functionality to the, let's suppose, an interface. If we want to implement a specific interface, or let's suppose if we want to extend a specific class to just have a little bit more functionality for any kind of specific reason, you can use this particular class also, if you don't like to define a proper structure for a class for that particular case in which you are defining this. Okay, so we're gonna see these types of class by the help of example. All right, so over here we have a very important question, which is that when we should have to use nested class. So there is no direct answer for it. Okay, there is no direct opinion that this could be the reason, but I have basically gathered some information from the documentation of Java over here, which I will discuss with you, that when it could be a suitable time to use these nested classes. But it usually depend on the specification of the program which you are developing. It usually depend on the criteria, okay, and the type of problem which you are solving. So there is no direct answer, right? So like I mentioned about nested class, that the nested classes enable you to logically group classes. Okay, logically, it is very important that you must have some kind of logic to group class, just like I discussed about gearbox, right? So when there is some kind of logic that you want to model for a specific object in your program, then you should use these nested classes. Okay, so like for example, let's take an example of your PC. Okay, so your PC contains several components. So let's suppose that you want to model that PC within your application. Then because it is composed of various components, so you must have to model those components in a specific way. So you can create an outer class PC, and then you can create inner classes about the components of PC. Like for example, PC has monitor, PC has keyboard, PC has mouse, PC has CPU, and so on and so forth. So you can create for all of these components inner classes within an outer class known as PC. Okay, so there must be a logic, there must be a concept, there must be a model which you are developing nested class for. Okay, so you cannot just go there and make a nested class without any reason. So there must be some kind of reason for which you are developing nested classes. So over here that we are saying that the nested classes enable you to logically group classes that are only used in one place, increase the use of encapsulation. Okay, because we are encapsulating every logical piece of component within a same class. Okay, we are not making different classes. We are not making second class for motherboard, we are not making second class for mouse, we are not making second class for keyboard. Instead we are basically creating all of these classes within a same class PC. Okay, so there should be a reason, and that particular reason could increase the use of encapsulation if we are making nested classes. So we are encapsulating every information which is a part of a specific model, which is a part of a specific object which we are modeling in our application. and to be able to create more readable and maintainable code. This is also a very specific advantage, that you can have a very understandable code, a very maintainable code. All of the specific part which a particular class need, all of that parts, all of that attributes, all of those classes are contained within a same class. So it could be, in some sense, it could be a maintainable code. So local classes, anonymous classes are also impart these advantages. Okay. However, they are intended to be used for more specific situations. So let me discuss those specific situations. So let's talk about a static nested class. When you have a use for it. Okay. So if your requirements are similar to those of a local class, okay, if you have a requirement which are similar to a local class and you want to make the type more widely available, and you don't require access to local variables or method parameters, then this particular class is a suitable choice for you. So when you don't require any access to local, this is very important point, because in static nested class we cannot access local variables that are defined, or you cannot access method parameters. So it is a convenient option for you to use when this particular requirement is not an option for you. Okay, it's not a requirement for you, so you can use a static nested class. Or when you have to make the data types or this specific type, the class itself, in this particular case the type means a class, the static nested class. When you want to make it more widely available outside of the scope, then you can use it, because you know then when you make something static, it means that it could be easily accessible. Just like static variables, every object, every variable which you gonna access, which you gonna give access to, and if it is defined as a static, then the same particular variable will be shared by all of the objects. Okay. So in the same way, this particular class, this particular static class can easily be widely available throughout the program. You can also use a non-static nested class, which is, again I say that it is known as inner class, if you require access to an enclosing instance of non-public fields and methods. So it means that when you require an access to non-public fields which are non-public, which you define as non-public, or methods which you define as non-public, you can use non-static nested class. Or you can say that use a static nested class if you don't require this. It means that if you don't require an instance non-public field and methods, if you don't require an access to this, which are the part of this static nested class, non-static nested class or inner class, then you can use a static nested class. Okay, so it is a little bit confusing at this point, but when we're gonna take an example, then you will better understand this. But at this point, just remember these points which I am sharing with you. It could be used as a reference purpose. Okay. Then when you can use nested local class, use it if you need to create more than one instance of a class. Okay. Basically, if you want to have more than one instance for any class which is defined within as a nested class, you can use this. Or when you want to access its constructor or introduce a new name type, so you can use it. And for anonymous class, you can use it if you need to declare fields or additional methods. Okay. For example, if you want to add some more fields, some more flexibility, some more functionality to a class, some more functionality, or you want to implement an interface without having to create a whole class for it, so you can do it by the help of anonymous class. So like I said, that these examples are just a reference, okay? It doesn't mean that these references will be a very, you can say that these will only be the part of decision when you want to use nested class, but these are some points that you can consider while creating nested classes. Okay, so let's start an example. So I'm gonna open up an INTELLIJ. This example will be very basic, okay? I'm gonna be very simple so that you can understand just the concept of it, okay? How you can create nested classes, because at this point it is convenient, or it is, you can say that it is a very good knowledge to have about nested classes. You must have at least a basic level of understanding about these nested classes. Alright, so now I'm gonna be creating a new project for the demonstration of nested classes. So I'm gonna go to the file, new project, choose Java, next, project name could be nested classes demo, okay? Alright, so now the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a outer class that will be an owning class for all of the classes which will be contained within it, okay? So we're gonna create a new Java class. I'm gonna say that this will be an outer class, okay? So I'm gonna just give the name as outer class, okay? At this particular point, my intention is to just give you the knowledge of nested classes, that's it. So I'm not going to follow a specific example for it, okay? So I will be just very straight towards this particular topic, okay? So now the thing is that this particular class will be a class, you can say an outer class, or you can say that this class will be an owning class for all of the classes which will be contained within it, or you can also say that this class can be also called as the enclosing class, okay? The class in which all the nested classes will be enclosed, okay? So this will be our base class for all of the our enclosing class for all of the nested classes. Alright, so now I'm going to define it with a very simple data, okay? So I'm going to make two fields first. First will be a static field and second will be non-static field. So let me build this up. So the first field will be static, it will be an integer, and I'm going to say that this will be static field. Alright, then we're going to have a non-static field, alright, and I'm going to say that this will be an instance field. Why I'm saying that this is an instance field? Because you know that when you define static, it means that this particular field will now be accessible to all of the objects which will be the part of this particular class directly, okay? It will, all the objects will now share this particular field, okay? All of the objects. But when you define any field as non-static, it means that this particular field will not be shared with every object. Okay, it will be a part of individual object which will be created by this class, but it will not be shared equally with all of the objects. Okay, so this is the difference between static and non-static. Okay, so let me show you this with some more example. So in this case, I'm gonna just create a constructor for this class, and I'm gonna just throw a message that executed constructor of which class? Outer class. Alright, just to have a message by which we can identify that which constructor is executed, because at this point we only have one class. Okay, but now we're gonna have more classes within this particular class. So to be able to identify that which particular constructor is executed, I'm just displaying a simple message. Okay, so now let me initialize this instance field with a value. Let's suppose I'm initializing it with 1. Okay, and I will not initialize this field. Okay, so let's see, if I go to the main class at this point and create an object of, but first let me access the static field. Okay, first let me access the static field without creating an object. You can access the static field without having to create an object, you know that, right? So let me print it out. So let me access outer class dot. You can say when I press dot, I have an access of static field only. Okay, so now I can print out its value. Why? Because it is defined as static. So if I execute the application, what do you think could be the result? Obviously it could be the default value of integer, which is 0, because over here we didn't initialize this particular field. But what if I want to access this field? Can I access it directly? If I type this instance field, you can see that it is throwing an error. It is saying that the non-static field cannot be referenced from a static context. Alright, because it is non-static, we cannot access it directly, you know that, right? So let me change it back to the code. Now what if I want to access this field? I have to create an object from this class, right? So let me create an object. If I create an object by referencing outer class is equal to new outer class. Okay, so now if I want to print the value of instance field, how can I do that? I can do that by the help of instance, by the help of object, because this field can only be accessible at instance level. Okay, this field can be accessible by class level or also by instance level. You can also access this field through an instance, right? Because it will be shared equally, it will be shared by all of the instances of this class, but this particular field will be unique to each instance of this particular class. So that is the difference between static and non-static. So let me show you. If I now use this object or instance to call the instance field, you can see that I am now accessing the instance field by the help of object. Okay, now if I execute this, we're going to have a value that we define in the instance field, that was 1, but you can see that now we also got the response from the constructor because we have initialized the constructor, right? But in this case we didn't initialize it, we just call the static field directly. So what if I access this field now by this object, what do you think could be the value? It could be 0 or it could be something else. Let's see. Now if I access it by the help of object outer class dot static field, now if I execute it, you can see we are getting 0, okay, because we didn't update a static field. Okay, at this point we didn't update it. So let's suppose I want to update this field, let's suppose. So let me come over here. So at this point, first I'm gonna update static field by class level, by the class level access. So I'm gonna update it by using class level, which is outer class dot static field, and let me update its value. So now what do you think could be a response from both of these different levels? This is by instance level we are accessing, and this is by class level we are accessing. What do you think? Only at this part we're gonna get 1, or we're gonna get also on this part the value equal to 1? We're gonna get both of these values equal to 1, because both of these fields are sharing the same value, right? So if I execute this, you will see that both of these now becomes 1. Okay, in the same way I can also create one more object. So let me create one more object, outer class 2 equal to new outer class. So now we have two objects, right? So I'm gonna update a static field now by the help of first object. Okay, so I'm gonna call first object outer class dot static field. You can see if I am doing this, so now this is by instance level we are accessing the static field. Alright, so now what do you think could be the output by both of these statements? It could be obviously the same output, because both of these outputs are using static field. So over here we got 1. Now 1 plus 2 equal to 3. So if I now execute it, you can see that we are getting 3. And in the same way, if I use outer class 2 to also share the output, which is the second object, then you're gonna see that it will also be the same value, even if the objects are different. You can see one is from class level and these two outputs are from instance level. And at this point, because all of these values are same, only because the field is defined as static, right? So now let me comment this out, and let's talk about instance field, right? Instance field is non-static field. So now if I want to change the value, so I could change the value for a specific object. Let's suppose I change the value for the first object. Okay, how can I change it? By referencing the first object name, then I can access the instance field and I update its value. Now if I print out the value from using the first object reference, if I save this, what do you think could be the answer? It will be, because the default value was 1, right? So it could now become 2. For which object? Only for the object on which you have initialized it, or on which you have update its value, right? If I execute it, now it will be 2, right? And you can see we have an output from the constructor from both of these objects. but let me update the instance field by the second object. Okay, so at this point I'm gonna decrement it and I'm gonna print its value too, just to make it clear to you that this particular field will not be shared equally with all of the objects. Okay, so now this one will get a value equal to 2, and what do you think this one will get? 1 minus 1 equal to 0. Let's see, if I execute it, you can see that both of the values are different, because we are not talking about a static field. In this case we are talking about an instance field or non-static field. So remember, the non-static field have access to instance level only, okay, but static field will gonna have an access at the class level and also on by the help of instance level, and the most important thing, that it will be shared by all of the objects equally. Okay, because it is static, it will have a direct access for all of the fields, for all of the objects. Okay, so now moving on with our discussion. Now we're gonna make the first nested class, and it will be the nested static class. So let me discuss some points related to this class, which is a nested class, and which type of nested class? Static class. Okay, so the nested classes are members of enclosing class, you already know. Static nested classes can access static members of the enclosing class. So this is very important, that a static nested class, when you are defining a nested class as static, it can only access static members of the enclosing class, or you can say of the outer class. The third point is, static nested classes are not associated with an instance of enclosing class, right? They are not associated, they are not you can say directly associated, okay, or directly connected with an instance of enclosing class or with an object of enclosing class. We can't use this for referencing nested static nested class. Okay, this keyword is not accessible within the scope of a static nested class, so it is also a very important point. So let's build a static nested class now. So again, I'm gonna be making a very simple example. So in this case, inside the outer class, I'm gonna make the first nested class, which is static class. Okay, a nested class which is static. So let's see. So now public static, and I'm gonna give this class a name as nested, or just I'm gonna say static class. Okay, static class is a predefined word, so I'm gonna say static nested class. Alright, also I'm gonna be using class keyword, right? So now you can see we have an nested class which is nested inside this outer class. So it means that this class owns, this class includes this particular nested class, right? So now within this nested class, I'm gonna be making let's include a constructor, right? So I'm gonna include a constructor. So I'm gonna say public static nested class, right? And I'm gonna just again throw a message by saying that executed constructor from this time I'm gonna change it to static nested class. Okay, and also at this point, to show you that if I access this particular field which is available within outer class of this nested class, I can access it, okay, because it is defined as static, and also your class is at a static level, so you can access the static field. That was the second point, that the static nested class can access static member. So let's see this. Right here I'm going to access this static field. You can see that I have an access within the static class. But what if I use this keyword? If I use this keyword, you can see we have an error. If I hover over it, at this point it cannot identify that which particular field I want to access, because I am using this, and this particular keyword is not allowed to have to use in static nested classes. Okay, so now you can see that we have this static field, right? If I create an object of this class, let me comment this out. So how could I create an object of static nested class? So in order to create an object of static nested class, what you have to do is you have to first type the name of the outer class, because at this point if I type the name of static nested class, you can see that it is easily accessible. If I do this static nested class, I hit enter, you can see that what INTELLIJ did, it type out the name of its owning class automatically. If I delete it, it will not be able to identify that which particular class I am referencing to, right? Because this is not an enclosing class, or this is not the base level class. It is a nested class, so you must have to use the name of the class for which it is a member of. So the outer class is the enclosing class, and this is a member of this class, so you have to provide the complete address, okay, like this. So now it is accessible, right? So now I'm gonna give this class instance a name. I'm gonna say static nested class, then I'm gonna use equal to new, and then in the same way I'm gonna call its constructor. You can see that we are calling its constructor in the same way, just like I defined over here, by the complete reference. If I don't use it over here, you can see again we are getting an error. That's because it is not accessible directly, it is a part of this class. What if I change this class to private, right? What if I change this static nested class to private? What do you think? Now it could be accessible. If I go back, you can see we have an error, okay? And if I mouse over it, what it is saying, that has private access in outer class. It means that you can not instantiate an object from this static nested class, because you have defined it as private, right? But what if I want to access, or I want to instantiate an object of this class within an outer class? Can I do it? If I come over here and I make an object of this class within a constructor, you can see that it is accessible. Why it is accessible? Because this private class is a part of this public class, okay? Even if it is private, but it is enclosed within this class, so it can in this particular class it can easily be accessible, right? So that was the basic definition of private which you use, okay? Private access modifier. So the class on which it is available will have an access, but the outside class will not have an access, okay? So let me change it back to public, and I will delete this line. So now if I go back, you can see we have an access now. If I execute this application, you can see we are getting an output that executed constructor of static nested class, and the value which we are getting for this static field is 0. Okay, so now you can see that what is the limitation of using static nested class. Now what if I make a static field within it, okay, this particular class. So let me make it. If I make a static integer field with the same name, static field, right, and if I initialize it with 1, the value of 1, what do you think now this particular value will be referencing to? This value or this one? You can easily identify by the highlighting that at this point it is referencing to this value, not this one, because it is now grayed out. Okay, so if I execute it, now we're going to have value equal to 1. So now if I want to access this value, okay, how could I do this? If I use this dot, you can see now it is working. Okay, now it is working, but this keyword is not referencing the fields of outside, or you can say the outer class. It is still referencing to this particular field, because this keyword means that you are referencing the field of this class. Okay, the class on which you are working on. So if I now execute it, you can see now we're going to have an output again equal to 1. It means that it is referencing to this field, the part of the class which is the part of this class, not the outer class. But what if I want to access this? Can I do this? If I do this outer class dot static field, now you can see that this field is now grayed out and this field is now become available. Okay, highlighted. So now if I execute it, you will see that I'm gonna get 0. Alright, you can see we are getting 0 now, which is the default value for this field, right? So now I hope that you have a better understanding that when you can use this keyword, because remember that whenever you are using this keyword, it means that you are referencing inside the nested class, or even if inside a class which don't have any nested class, it means that you are referencing the fields or the properties which are a part of that particular class on which you are using this keyword. Alright, so now we're gonna move forward. So now we're gonna have the second type, which is known as nested inner class. Okay, so nested inner class is also known as non-static nested classes. Okay, which are not static, right? So inner classes are associated with an instance of the enclosing class. This is a very important point, that these classes are associated with an instance of the class, but the class which we cover before, it was nested static class, and these classes are not associated with an instance of enclosing class. You can see that over here. You can see that in order to be able to create an object, okay, what I did is I just use the reference for the class, okay, for the class on which this particular class is enclosed within. Okay, so I didn't initialize first the constructor of this class in order to make an object of this class. You can see that we are getting an output only from the nested class. It means that this class constructor didn't execute this. Okay, it just over here just we are passing the reference. Okay, we are just passing the reference by using the name of the outer class. Okay, so it means that the static nested class is not directly associated. It is very confusing point, but it is very important to be able to understand that you are not creating an instance first of your outer class in order to create an instance of a static nested class. All right, but when you have to create an instance of inner class or non-static nested class, you must have to create first an instance of your outer class. So that is the point right here, that inner class are associated with an instance of the enclosing class. So they don't have a direct access, just like non-instance variable. Okay, so inner classes can access static and non-static both members of the enclosing class, and also inner class cannot have static member. This is very important point, that you cannot define static members within a non-static class, which is inner class. So let's build an inner class which is a non-static nested class. Okay, so let me go back now, and I'm gonna make one more class. You can see that I'm making this class also within a same outer class after this nested class. So this will be second nested class, and it will be a nested inner class, or you can also say this non-static nested class. Okay, so now within this particular class, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make its structure by using public class. I'm gonna call this as inner class. All right, now inside this inner class we're gonna have a field, a non-static field, because we cannot define a static field. So I'm gonna make it again an integer field. I'm gonna say this will be an instance field. The same name I'm gonna give to this variable, just like this. Okay, in order to make an example for you that how we can access both of these values. So now I want to access its value. At this point we have two values. We have two fields which are same name. Okay, which have same name. The first value is contained within an outer class. It has a initialized value equal to 1, and this one is we didn't initialize it at this point, so it is not initialized yet, right? So we're gonna get 0 if we print out the value of this field, and we're gonna get 1 if we print out the value of this field, right? So how can I access it? I can again access it by the help of this keyword. If I do this SOUT, let me change it to okay, alright, so my mistake, I need to do it inside a constructor. First I'm going to make a constructor, public inner class. Okay, inside here first I'm gonna just print out the message that executed constructor of which class, of inner class. Alright, then we're gonna have a value. First I'm gonna print its particular instance field value, its own. Okay, so how can I do that? I'm gonna pass on the value this dot instance field. So at this point you can see that it is highlighting this particular field, it is not highlighting this field. It means that it will use the value for this field. Now what if I want to access this one? So at this point I'm gonna have to more specific. So I'm gonna say that I want to access the value of outer class dot this dot instance field. You can see that over here we have to use the name of the class, which is the owning class, and then in order to access it we also have to use this, because this is an instance level field, and the example which I discussed previously was related to static field. Static field can be accessible directly by the help of class, but in order to access it, because it is non-static, we have to use this keyword, right? So that was the difference again in between static and non-static access, okay, by within a nested class in a static and in non-static. So if I want to print out the value of these fields, so I have to create an object. So how could you create an object? Let me comment this out. So in order to create an object of inner class, or you can say non-static nested class, first you have to create an instance of outer class, okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna type out the name outer class, okay, and if I do this dot, you can see I can access inner class. So if I make an object of inner class, but at this point what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create new dot, okay. First I'm gonna type out the name of outer class, then dot new, okay. You can see that it is not letting me create an instance by just doing this new outer class dot inner class. If I do this, you can see we have an error. If I mouse over it, what is saying that the outer class is not an enclosing class. So basically it is not allowing me to have an object of non-static nested class without having a reference of the class which is contained within which is the owner of this particular class, okay. So because it is not directly associated, it is non-static class, so first I have to create an object of this class. So how can I do that? Again, by going the first line, I'm going to say outer class equal to new outer class, okay. Now if I want to create an instance of this, I want to use the reference of this, I have to use the reference of it, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the outer class dot, I'm going to use new keyword, and then the name of the class for which I want to make an object for. So you can see over here we have a very special new syntax for you. You can see what we are doing in this particular line. We are creating an instance of inner class, but by the help of instance of outer class, because it is not directly accessible. This constructor is not directly accessible. In the first example, when we created an object of static nested class, what we did, we just directly call by the reference of outer class, we just directly call the constructor of a static nested class because it was defined as a static. But this class is non-static class, and it is must for you that you must have to use the reference of the instance of the class on which this particular class is contained. At this point it is outer class, so we are using the reference of it in order to create a new instance of it, okay. At this point it is inner class, alright. So now let me comment this back, and now if I execute it, you can see the constructor is executed of both class at this time, because we have created an instance of outer class also. So executed constructor of outer class, then we have executed constructor of inner class, and then you can say we have the values. First is the value from outer class of instance field, first one is the value of from inner class of the instance field, and second one is the value from the outer class, which is 1 right here. it is initialized to 1. Okay, so that's for inner class. Now we're going to talk about local classes. So the local classes can also be nested. Okay, and by the name of local, it means that local class can access the local variables of the enclosing method only if the local variables are declared as constant. So it is very important then that you must have those local variables which you will be using inside the local class. They must be defined as constant within the method on which you are making a local class. Let's see this. So now I'm going to make a method first, because you know that the local class cannot be directly contained within the outer class. Okay, so we're going to make a method. I'm going to say public void, and I'm going to change I'm going to give this a name as instance method. Okay, so now inside this method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a local class. Okay, so let's make a local class. You can see that we are making a class within the method. Okay, we are making the class within the method, and that particular method is a part of another class, which is the outer class. Okay, so now inside this method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a local class. I'm going to say public class, and this will be local class. Okay, now you can see we have an error. If I put a mouse over it, you can see what it is telling us, that public modifier is not allowed here. Why it is not allowed here? Because it is a local class. It cannot be accessed outside of this method. It can only be accessed within the same method on which you are defining this class. Okay, so now I'm going to make this to private. So still, if I do this private, you can see that it is telling me that the modifier private is also not allowed here. So it means that you cannot use any kind of access modifier only than the type. Other than the type, you're just going to define the type, and then you're going to define the name itself for the local class. Because it is a local class, it will only be accessible within the method. Okay, so now inside this local class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a constructor, public local class, and I'm going to say executed constructor of local class. Okay, so now if I want to initialize this class, I can initialize it by calling this method. Okay, but first let me show you. If I let's suppose if I make a local variable, I'm going to say local equal to 1. Alright, so now if I want to access it, I can access it right here. I'm going to say local equal to and its value. Alright, so you can see that it is accessible. But what if I change its value? If I update its value, you can see we have an error. If I put a mouse over it, variable local is accessed from within inner class, so it needs to be final or effectively final. It means that we cannot have any other value than constant. Okay, we can only define constant field within this particular method, which is using within the local class. If I make any other let's suppose if I make this variable and I update it, you can see we are not getting any error because it is not utilizing within this particular class at this point. Okay, but if we are using the variable, so it must be defined as constant for local class. Okay, it is very important point right here. So now if I want to initialize it, I'm gonna go to the main method. I'm gonna comment this out now, and I'm gonna initialize it by the help of outer class object. So I'm gonna make an outer class object first. Okay, and then I'm gonna access its method, outer class dot instance method. So if I execute it at this point, you can see that we got the output from the constructor of outer class, but we didn't get the output from this method because we didn't create an instance. Okay, so I need to create an instance for this local class. So after this local class, within the same method, okay, within the same method, I'm going to create an instance of it. Local class is equal to new local class. Okay, I can only create an instance of local class inside the method on which I have developed this particular class. Okay, so now if I save this and execute it, you will see that we're gonna have an output from also local class and the value which we printed. Okay, so that was about local class. So I'm going to change this to instance method local class, and also here, right, and I'm going to create one more method for demonstrating anonymous class, instance method anonymous class, right. So again, anonymous class will also be accessible within the method on which we're going to define it. So now for anonymous class, you know that because of the word anonymous, you can identify that they don't have any specific name. It needs a class or interface in order to be implemented anonymously. That could be the reason for this class implementation, or it can also be the reason to extend the functionality of a class for which we are making a nested anonymous class for. So let's suppose if I want to make the nested class of nested anonymous class for the class which is the super class of all classes in Java, that is known as object class. Okay, which contain the method toString, right. So if I come over here and if I use the reference of object class object, then I'm gonna pass a name for creating this object. In this case, I'm gonna say that we are creating an anonymous object class in a form of nested. Okay, so it is nested within the method, but it is anonymous. It don't have any name. Okay, this particular class don't have any name. So how we gonna make this class? By using new. You can see we are using new keyword, but we're not going to call the constructor of it. We're gonna just use the curly braces, right, like this. Okay, so you can see that we are defining an anonymous class by the help of a class which is already implemented, that is object. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just override the toString method which is a part of object class. So I'm gonna click OK, and I'm gonna return a message. I'm gonna say executed inside anonymous class. So you can see that if I create a constructor of this, if I do this public, and if I do this, it will not allow me to do it. Okay, if I put a mouse over it, you can see that it is considering this as a method, because we cannot have a constructor within anonymous class. Okay, So now if I want to basically execute it, what I could do is I could call this method, right? But within the method I'm gonna use this object name. Okay, so let me use it. So it will call this toString method, and then within the toString method we're gonna have the implementation for it, for this particular anonymous class. So let's see, if I call this method now, outer class dot instance method of anonymous class, I'm gonna comment this out, this one, and hit execute. Then you can see we have an output from anonymous class. Okay, so that was the discussion for nested classes. As you can see that we have covered all the 4 major types of nested classes which are available. Okay, it could be a little bit confusing at this point, but when you're gonna practice it, then you can identify that how we could use these classes. Okay, so that's about it for this particular lesson.